Imagine patrolling the deep, isolated Appalachian trails, where every rustle in the leaves could be more than just the wind. What if the very wilderness you protect holds secrets so dark they've been whispered about for generations, but never truly seen? Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. The Appalachian trails are famed for their beauty, but beneath that serene facade lies a chilling truth. Some paths are best left forgotten. Tonight we unearth the terrifying, unexplained encounters of the unseen watchmen, park rangers. These are not campfire tales. These are their bone-chilling testimonies. Stories from the very people sworn to protect these lands. Accounts of horrors that have been kept silent until now. Prepare to venture off the beaten path. Story 1. The trail that wasn't there for a park ranger. The map is a Bible. The trails are the gospel. You learn to read the topography like the lines on your own hand. You trust the ink, the carefully drawn contour lines, the dotted paths that have been walked by thousands. You trust the map because out here, in the vast, indifferent green of the Appalachian wilderness, it's the only thing that separates a good day's hike from a slow, lonely death. So when you find a trail that isn't on the map, a path that shouldn't exist, you learn to do one thing. You turn around and you walk away. I learned that lesson the hard way. It was my 3rd year as a ranger, stationed in a remote section of the Great Smoky Mountains. I was on a routine solo patrol, a 3-day sweep of the backcountry to check for trail damage after a series of heavy storms. On the 2nd day, about 10 miles from my nearest access road, I found it. It was a faint, narrow path, branching off the main trail, leading down into a deep, misty hollow I'd never seen before. It wasn't on my topographical map. It wasn't on the Park Service's official GIS data. It simply did not exist. My job was to report it, mark it as a hazardous social trail, and then block it off. But something about it called to me. It was perfectly formed, the packed earth smooth and clear, as if it were walked every day. Yet there were no footprints, no animal tracks. The silence that emanated from the hollow was profound, a heavy, watchful quiet that seemed to swallow the ambient sounds of the forest. Against every rule, against every instinct, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to walk it just for 100 yards, just to see where it led. The moment I stepped onto the new trail, the world changed. The air grew cold, heavy, and smelled of damp, turned earth and something else, something sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit. The trees in the hollow were different, their bark a sickly pale gray, their branches twisted into agonized, grasping shapes. The light that filtered through the canopy was a dim, bruised purple, even though the sky above the ridge was a brilliant blue. I walked for what I thought was 100 yards, but when I turned to look back, the main trail, the world I had just left, was gone. It had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable wall of the same sick gray trees. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my professional calm. I pulled out my compass. The needle spun lazily, then settled, quivering on no fixed point. My radio was dead, not even static, just a profound, empty silence. I was in a place that did not want to be found. A place that wasn't on any map because it wasn't a part of our world. I had no choice but to follow the trail forward. I walked for what felt like hours through this silent, purple-hued purgatory. And then I started to find the offerings. They were placed neatly on flat rocks beside the trail, like gifts for a forgotten god. A single, brightly colored child's mitten, a tarnished silver locket, a worn, leather-bound Bible, by a modern, expensive-looking digital camera. They were all pristine, untouched by the elements, as if they had been placed there only moments ago. They were the lost things, the objects that people who vanish in the woods leave behind. And this trail was a museum of their final moments. As the purple twilight deepened, I came to a small clearing. In the center stood a single, massive, ancient oak tree, its bark as black as charcoal, and hanging from its branches were dozens of pairs of hiking boots. They were tied together by their laces, dangling like strange, macabre fruit. Boots of all sizes, all eras, from old, hobnailed leather boots to modern, brightly colored trail runners. They swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel, their soft, rhythmic thumping the only sound in this dead, silent world. This wasn't just a trail. It was a pilgrimage, a final, one-way journey. And these boots were the final offering of the pilgrims who had walked it before me. I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. I had to get out. I turned and ran blindly, back the way I had come. But the trail was a liar. It twisted and turned, looping back on itself. I would run for what felt like a mile, only to find myself back in the clearing with the boot tree. It was a labyrinth, a one-way in, no-way-out trap. I don't know how long I was in there. The purple light never changed. I didn't feel hunger or thirst, only a profound, soul-crushing despair. I finally collapsed at the base of the boot tree, defeated. I was going to die here. My boots were going to join the collection. As I sat there waiting for the end, I noticed something carved into the black bark of the tree. A single, crudely scratched word. Sing. It was insane. A final, desperate, nonsensical clue from a previous victim. But I had nothing left to lose. I took a deep, shaky breath, and I began to sing. I sang the only song I could remember, a stupid, cheerful campfire song from my childhood. My voice was a weak, pathetic thing in the overwhelming silence. But as I sang, something began to happen. The purple light began to flicker. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere seemed to thin. The sick grey trees began to recede, their forms becoming blurry, translucent. I kept singing, my voice growing stronger, more confident. The trail, the one that had been a closed loop, began to straighten. I could see a faint green light at the far end of it, the real world. I scrambled to my feet and ran towards it, singing at the top of my lungs. The world around me was dissolving. The boot tree, the grey woods, all of it fading like a bad dream. I burst through the veil and collapsed onto the rich, brown earth of the main trail. The familiar sounds of birdsong and buzzing insects, a glorious, welcome symphony. I was found the next day by another ranger, miles from where I should have been, dehydrated and incoherent. I had been missing for 3 days. I never told them the full story. I just said I'd gotten lost. But I know the truth. I know that there are places in these ancient mountains that operate on a different set of rules. Places that are hungry. And I know that the trail that wasn't there is a predator of a different kind. It doesn't hunt you with teeth and claws. It lures you in with silence and beauty, and it feeds on your hope. And the only thing that can fight it, the only thing that it cannot understand, the only thing that is truly of our world and not of its, is a simple human song. Story 2. The echoes of Roan Mountain as a park ranger. You get used to the sounds of the forest at night. The hoot of an owl, the snap of a twig, the distant howl of a coyote. They become a comforting, predictable chorus. But the sounds I heard during my winter tenure on Roan Mountain, a place known for its eerie, windswept balds and ghost-like rime ice formations, were not part of that chorus. They were an echo of a terrible human violence, replaying itself night after night, a sound that froze the very marrow in my bones. I was the sole winter caretaker of a remote section of the trail. My nearest human contact, a 30-mile snowmobile ride away. My job was to maintain the shelters and ensure the trail was passable for the few hardy souls who dared to hike in the off-season. The first time I heard it, I was in my small, isolated ranger cabin, a blizzard raging outside. It was a scream, a woman's scream, high-pitched, terrified, and abruptly cut off. It was so clear, so close, it sounded like it was right outside my window. I grabbed my mag light and my sidearm, my heart pounding, convinced a hiker was in trouble. I burst outside into the swirling snow. Nothing. Just the howl of the wind and the endless, empty white. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the storm. I spent the rest of the night by the radio, trying to raise dispatch. But the storm was too strong. I was utterly, completely alone. I told myself it was the wind. The locals called it the Roan Scream, a trick of the wind whipping through the high mountain passes, creating a sound that mimicked a human cry. A rational, plausible explanation. But the next night there was no blizzard. The sky was a vast, cold, crystal-clear canvas of stars, and I heard it again, the same scream, from the same spot, just beyond the tree line. And this time it was followed by another sound, a man's voice, low and guttural, speaking a single, angry word in a language I didn't recognize. Then the sound of a heavy, wet thud, like an axe striking a side of beef. Then silence. This was not the wind. This was a memory, an auditory ghost. I spent the next day searching the area where the sounds had come from. I found nothing. No old graves, no signs of a struggle, just snow and rock, and the profound, watchful silence of the mountain. The nightly performance continued, a terrifying, ritualistic replay of a long-forgotten murder. The woman's scream, the man's angry word, the sickening thud. I was becoming a prisoner in my own cabin, dreading the setting of the sun, the inevitable start of the show. My rational mind was at war with the evidence of my own senses. I started sleeping with the radio on, a constant crackle of static to drown out the spectral violence outside my door. But the haunting was not content to remain an echo. It began to bleed into my reality. I started finding things in the snow. A single antique mother-of-pearl button. A long, dark strand of human hair, frozen to the porch railing. One morning, I found a deep, axe-like gash in the wood of my cabin door. A gash that had not been there the night before. The auditory ghost was trying to become a physical one. It was trying to break in. The final night was the worst. The sounds began as usual. The scream, the angry word, the thud. But this time, it wasn't followed by silence. It was followed by a new sound, a soft, rhythmic dragging. It was coming towards the cabin. I grabbed my shotgun, my hands slick with sweat, and I watched the tree line. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the rough, homespun clothes of a 19th century settler. He was translucent, a shimmering gray ghost in the moonlight, and he was dragging something, the body of a woman. I was frozen, a spectator to a century-old crime. He dragged her to the center of the clearing in front of my cabin and dropped her in the snow. He was holding a woodsman's axe, its head a dark, ugly shape. He raised it over his head, but he didn't bring it down on the woman. He turned, his shimmering, hate-filled eyes locking with mine through the window, and he began to walk towards the cabin. He was no longer content to just replay his crime. He had an audience now, and he wanted me to be the new star of his show. He raised the phantom axe and swung it at my door. I didn't hear a sound, but I saw the wood of the door splinter and crack, a new, deep gash appearing in the solid oak. He was real. He was here, and he was getting in. I did the only thing I could think of. I didn't fire the shotgun. What good would that do against a ghost? I grabbed the small emergency air horn I kept for scaring off bears. It was a sound of my world, a sound of the modern age, a sound that did not belong in his century, in his memory. As he raised the axe for another blow, I shattered the silence with a deafening, piercing blast from the air horn. The ghost recoiled, a silent scream, twisting his translucent features. The sound, the modern, technological, out-of-place sound, was anathema to him. He shimmered violently, his form becoming thin, stretched, like a photograph being burned. And then, with a final, hateful glare, he dissolved into the cold night air. The ghostly woman on the ground, the axe, all of it vanished. I didn't wait for my replacement. I packed my gear, got on the snowmobile, and I left Roan Mountain that night. I know now that some places are more than just rock and ice. They are scars on the landscape, places where an act of violence was so profound it left a permanent, bleeding wound in time itself. And that wound will play out its tragedy over and over for anyone who is unlucky enough to be there. And sometimes it will get bored of being a memory. and it will look for a way to become a reality again. Story 3. The Watcher on the Ridge. As a park ranger, you develop a sixth sense for when you're being watched. It's a prickle on the back of your neck, a sudden stillness in the air, the feeling of unseen eyes on you. Most of the time, it's just a deer, or a coyote, or a curious black bear. But what watched me from the high, lonely ridges of Shenandoah National Park was not an animal. It was a silent, patient, and utterly alien observer, and its attention was a weight that nearly broke my mind. My patrol route was a 20-mile loop that took me through some of the most remote and beautiful parts of the park. It was a job I loved, a perfect blend of solitude and purpose. The first time I saw it, I was on a high ridge, looking out over the endless, rolling blue-green mountains. It was a flicker of movement on the opposite ridge, about a mile away. I raised my binoculars, expecting to see a bear or a fellow hiker. What I saw was a figure. It was standing on the very edge of a sheer cliff, a tall, dark silhouette against the bright blue sky. It was too tall to be a person, and its proportions were all wrong. It was impossibly thin, its limbs long and angular, like a stick figure drawn by a nervous hand. And it was just standing there, perfectly still, watching me. I lowered my binoculars, a strange sense of unease washing over me. I looked again. It was gone. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a strange shadow, a dead tree that looked like a person from a distance. But the next day, I saw it again. I was in a different part of the park, a low, wooded valley, and I looked up at the ridge above me. There it was, the same tall, thin silhouette, standing motionless, watching me. This became a daily occurrence. No matter where I was on my patrol, I would see it, sometimes on a distant ridge, sometimes half hidden behind a tree just 100 yards away. It never moved. It never made a sound. It just watched. It was a silent, constant, and deeply unsettling presence. I started calling it the Watcher. My rational mind, the part of me that had been trained to identify and categorize, was at war with what I was seeing. I tried to photograph it, but it was always too far away, my pictures showing nothing but a blurry, ambiguous smudge. I tried to approach it, but it would simply vanish the moment I took a step towards it. It wasn't a physical being in the way I understood it. It was more like a shadow that had detached itself from its owner, a glitch in the landscape. The psychological toll was immense. The beautiful solitude of the park became a suffocating, paranoid prison. Every shadow looked like the Watcher. Every rustle of leaves was a sign of its approach. I felt like a specimen in a jar, being constantly, silently, and dispassionately observed by something I could not comprehend. I started to unravel. My hands would shake. I couldn't sleep. My supervisor noticed the change in me and put me on a temporary desk assignment, thinking I was suffering from burnout. I thought being away from the park, away from the ridges, would help. It didn't. The Watcher wasn't tied to the mountains. It was tied to me. I started seeing it in the city, a tall, thin shadow, standing on a rooftop across the street from my apartment. A fleeting, angular figure in the reflection of a storefront window. It was no longer just observing me in its territory. It had followed me into mine. The true, horrifying nature of the Watcher was revealed to me on a night I will never forget. I was driving home, my nerves raw, my eyes darting at every shadow. I had to know what it was. I had to confront it. I drove not to my apartment, but back to the park. I drove to the highest overlook, the place where I had first seen it, and I got out of my truck. The sun had just set, the sky a deep, bruised purple. I stood at the edge of the overlook, and I screamed into the vast, empty space. "What do you want from me?" My voice was a raw, desperate thing. For a long time, there was only silence. Then I saw it. It wasn't on the opposite ridge this time. It was standing at the far end of the parking lot, not 50 feet away from me. It was a perfect, three-dimensional silhouette, a hole in the world, a creature made of pure, absolute blackness. And it began to move towards me, not with steps, but with a smooth, silent glide. I stood my ground, paralyzed by a terror that was so complete it had become a strange, cold calm. It glided to a stop about 10 feet in front of me. I could feel a profound, ancient cold radiating from it, and then it began to change. Its inky black form began to solidify, to take on color and texture and detail. It was like watching a photograph develop in reverse, and the form it took was me. It was a perfect, flawless replica of myself, down to the frayed cuff on my ranger jacket and the worried frown on my face. It stood there, my doppelganger, and it smiled, a slow, cold, and utterly alien smile. And then it spoke, not with its own voice, but with a chorus of 100 different voices, all whispering in unison. The voices of the people who had come to this overlook, whose fleeting thoughts, whose passing observations it had collected over the centuries. "We just wanted to see," the chorus whispered. "We just wanted to know what it felt like to be seen." And I finally understood. The Watcher wasn't a creature. It was a reflection, a psychic echo of the park itself, a sentient landscape that had spent millennia being observed by humans, and had finally, in its own alien way, learned to look back. It wasn't hunting me. It was trying to become me. It was a lonely god, trying on a human skin, a cosmic child playing dress-up with my life. The replica of me took a single step forward, its hand outstretched. "It is your turn to watch," the chorus whispered. I didn't wait to find out what that meant. I turned and ran to my truck, my mind a shattered mess. I drove away, and I never went back. I quit my job as a ranger the next day. I moved to a city in the flattest part of the country I could find, a place with no ridges, no overlooks, no ancient watching mountains. But I know it's not over. Sometimes I'll catch my own reflection in a window, and for a split second, my reflection won't be mine. It will be a tall, thin, dark silhouette, and it will be watching. And I know that one day it will finish what it started. It will learn enough, and it will step out of the glass. And it will be my turn to be the silent, lonely shadow on a forgotten ridge. Story 4. The Root Cellar as a Park Ranger. You're part of a strange, informal brotherhood. We share stories, warnings, and a list of unofficial places to avoid. At the top of that list, for anyone stationed in the southern Appalachians, was the old Hemlock homestead. It was a collection of collapsed log cabins and a single, miraculously intact stone root cellar, all that remained of a small, isolated community that had simply ceased to exist in the winter of 1873. The official story was that they had all succumbed to a brutal winter. The unofficial story, the one the old-timers whispered, was that they had been taken by something that lived in the ground. My job was to patrol the area, to keep hikers from wandering into the dangerous, unstable ruins. I always hated going there. The air around the homestead was heavy, still, and smelled of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic and unpleasant. The root cellar was the heart of the wrongness. It was a small, stone-lined pit in the ground, with a heavy oak door set at an angle. It was always cold, even on the hottest summer day, a deep, unnatural cold that seemed to leach the heat from your very bones. And it had a rule that had been passed down from ranger to ranger for 100 years. You never, ever open the door after dark. For 2 years, I obeyed that rule without questions. Then came the night of the storm. A freak thunderstorm rolled in, bringing with it torrential rain and winds that tore through the forest like a hurricane. I was caught out on patrol, miles from my station, and the nearest shelter was the old Hemlock homestead. I knew I had to get out of the lightning. With a sense of profound, gut-wrenching dread, I made for the root cellar. It was the only solid structure for miles. I arrived just as the sky opened up, soaked to the bone and shivering. It was well after dark. I stood before the heavy oak door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear the wind howling, the trees groaning. It was just a storm. I was a man of science, a man of the modern world. The old stories were just ghost tales. I pulled open the heavy, creaking door and descended the stone steps into the pitch-black darkness. The moment I closed the door behind me, the sound of the storm vanished. Not muffled, vanished. I was in a pocket of absolute, profound silence. The air was icy cold and carried that same metallic, earthy scent, but it was stronger in here, almost overpowering. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small, stone-lined room, about 10 feet by 10 feet. It was completely empty, save for a thick layer of dust and a few scattered dead leaves. I let out a shaky breath of relief. It was just a cellar, a creepy, silent, cold cellar, but a cellar nonetheless. I sat down on the stone steps, my back to the door, and I waited for the storm to pass. I must have been in there for an hour when I first heard it. A soft, wet, scraping sound. It was coming from the far wall. I shined my flashlight on it. Nothing. Just a wall of rough-hewn stone. The scraping started again, louder, this time, and I realized it wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from inside the wall. I stood up, my fear returning with a vengeance. And then I saw it. The mortar between the stones on the far wall was moving. It was pulsing, liquefying, turning a dark, muddy brown. A single, thin, pale, root-like tendril, no thicker than a piece of string, pushed its way through the softened mortar. It was followed by another and another. They were like the questing, searching roots of a plant, but they moved with a slow, deliberate, intelligent purpose. I was frozen, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. The tendrils began to weave together, forming a complex, lattice-like pattern on the stone wall. And in the center of this pattern, a shape began to form, a face. It was a long, narrow, and disturbingly human-like face, with two deep, empty hollows for eyes and a wide, lipless slit for a mouth. It was a face made of 1,000 tiny, writhing roots. The root face turned its empty gaze on me. The lipless slit opened, and a voice, a dry, rustling, earthy whisper, echoed in the small, silent room. So hungry, it whispered, so long since the last rain. And then the floor beneath my feet began to soften. The packed earth was turning to a thick, muddy slurry. I was sinking. I looked down, and the same pale, root-like tendrils were erupting from the ground, wrapping around my ankles, my calves, their grip surprisingly strong. They weren't pulling me down, they were planting me. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was swallowed by the silent, earthen tomb. I thrashed, I kicked, but the roots held me fast. I was sinking up to my knees now, the cold, wet earth, a greedy, hungry mouth. The root face on the wall watched my struggle, its expression one of calm, patient, agricultural satisfaction. I finally understood the story of the Hemlock homestead. They hadn't frozen to death. They had been planted. They had been the first crop, the thing in the cellar. This ancient, terrestrial intelligence was a farmer, and it had been sleeping, hibernating, waiting for the rains to come, waiting for someone foolish enough to seek shelter in its larder, in its nursery. I was going to die. I was going to become another one of its silent, rooted victims. In a final, desperate act, I took the one thing I had that was not of the earth. I took my flare gun. I aimed it at the root face on the wall, and I fired. The flare shot out a brilliant, magnesium-white sun that filled the small cellar with an intense, searing light and heat. The root face let out a silent, agonized scream, its form shriveling, turning black, the tendrils retracting back into the wall. The roots around my legs loosened their grip, the ground beneath me firming up. I scrambled out of the muck, tore open the heavy oak door, and burst out into the storm, not caring about the wind, the rain, the lightning. I know what lies sleeping under the old Hemlock homestead. It is a thing of root and stone and profound, patient hunger. And I know that I did not kill it. I only hurt it. I only drove it back into its deep, dark, earthen slumber. And it is still there, dreaming of the rain, dreaming of the harvest. and waiting patiently for the next lost seed to wander into its garden. Story 5. The Tall Man. Every park has its ghost stories, its local legends. In my little corner of the Virginia Appalachians, we had the Tall Man. The story was told to every new ranger. A long time ago, a greedy tollkeeper on the old mountain pass would rob and murder travelers, burying their bodies under the stones of his small toll booth. The pass was eventually bypassed by a modern highway, the toll booth left to rot in the deep woods. The legend says the keeper's greedy spirit still guards his bridge, and that he still demands a toll from anyone who crosses. A silver coin, they said, was the price to pass safely. A quaint, harmless bit of folklore, or so I thought. My patrol route took me past the old pass twice a week. It was a beautiful, melancholic place. The stone bridge covered in moss, the ruined toll booth a pile of crumbling rock. I never gave the story much thought. Then a hiker went missing. A young man, an amateur photographer, had gone off trail, telling his friends he wanted to get a picture of the old ghost bridge. He was never seen again. We searched for a week. We found his camera lying on the ground near the bridge. The last photo on it was of the toll booth ruin. It was a normal, boring picture of a pile of rocks. But when the lab enhanced the image, they saw it. A faint, almost invisible figure standing in the dark, empty doorway of the ruin. It was tall, thin, and seemed to be wearing a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The case went cold, but for the rangers, the old story suddenly had a new, sinister weight. We started leaving a silver quarter on the bridge every time we passed, a half-joking, half-serious tribute. Better safe than sorry, we'd say. A year later, I was the one who got the call. Another hiker was missing. A woman, this time, a seasoned through hiker, had vanished from the same area. Her last journal entry, found in her tent, was a single, chilling sentence. Forgot to pay the toll. He looks angry. I was the first ranger on the scene. I went straight to the bridge. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. The air was cold. Still, I stood at the edge of the bridge, a profound sense of dread washing over me. And then I saw him. He was standing in the doorway of the ruined toll booth, just like in the photograph. A tall, dark figure, his face obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't translucent. He was solid, real, and he was watching me. He took a single, slow step out of the ruin and onto the path. He was holding something in his hand, a long, dark, wooden pole, like an old ferryman's staff. He began to walk towards me, his movements slow, deliberate, and utterly silent. He didn't have feet. His long, dark coat seemed to just end, hovering an inch above the ground, gliding over the rocks and roots. My hand went to my sidearm, but I knew it would be useless. This was not a man. This was something else, something ancient and bound to this place. He glided to a stop at the far end of the bridge, blocking my path. He slowly lifted his head, and I could see his face in the deepening twilight. It was a pale, gaunt, and utterly emotionless face, with two deep-set black holes where his eyes should have been. He raised his free hand, his palm open, a silent, demanding gesture. The toll, my blood ran cold. I always carried a few quarters for the vending machine back at the station. But in my haste to get to the scene, I had left my wallet in the truck. I had nothing. I had no silver. I shook my head, my mouth too dry to speak. I took a step back. The figure's emotionless face did not change, but I felt a wave of cold, profound, and deeply disappointed anger wash over me. He slowly lowered his hand and took a step towards me, onto the bridge, his long staff clicking softly on the ancient stones. And then the world changed. The air around the bridge grew thick, heavy, and grey. The sounds of the forest faded away, replaced by a low, mournful, groaning sound. The stones of the bridge beneath my feet began to shift, to soften. I looked down. The stones were no longer stones. They were faces. Hundreds of pale, grey, agonized faces, their mouths open in silent screams, their bodies pressed together to form the foundation, the arches, the very roadbed of the bridge. These were the travelers who hadn't paid the toll. They were not buried under the bridge. They were the bridge. The toll man glided towards me, his dark, empty eyes fixed on mine. He was not a greedy ghost. He was a collector, a ferryman between worlds, and his price was not silver. His price was you. The silver was just a token, a sign of respect that allowed you to pass. But if you had no offering, you became the offering. You became another stone in his ever-growing, ever-hungry bridge. I scrambled back, my feet slipping on the shifting, screaming faces of the stones. He raised his staff. I knew what was coming next. He was going to touch me, and I was going to become a part of his eternal, silent collection. In a final, desperate act, I ripped the Silver Ranger's badge from my uniform shirt, and I threw it. It sailed through the air, a spinning silver disc, and landed at his non-existent feet. He stopped. He slowly lowered his head, his black, empty gaze falling on the badge. He stood there for a long, silent moment, and then he bent, a slow, creaking, unfolding motion, and he picked it up. He held it in his pale, long-fingered hand, and then he turned and glided back to his ruined toll booth, the badge clutched in his fist. He had received his payment. He had been satisfied. The world rushed back in. The stones were just stones again. The sounds of the forest returned. The figure was gone. I ran from that bridge, and I never went back. I resigned from the Park Service the next day. I know now that some legends are not just stories. They are rules. They are contracts. And the Appalachian wilderness is full of old, forgotten gatekeepers who still demand a price for passage. And if you find yourself on a lonely bridge, at the end of the day, you had better have a coin in your pocket, because the toll man is always watching, and his collection is never, ever full.